time I've ever been around something that's been so perfectly put together that there's no need for any other amendment. There's no need to take this to our communities to discuss it with them. And we just need to move it right along.
And then we take it and we decision make within an hour or so. Wow, that's incredible. I mean, the people of Hawaii must be very impressed. We can't fix our roads. We have problems with education facilities and schools and stuff and everything. Trying to get the Department of Education to solve a traffic problem in my district.
Representative, please just stick to the merits of the
The
bill
merits
that's before you.
Mr. Speaker, I am not convinced, nor are the people of Hawaii convinced that we cannot do better or that this is something that needs to be moved out of this body, Mr. Speaker. Nobody's convinced. But only those who believe this is a dog and pony show, Mr. Speaker. Why have they come here? Why have they come here? Why have they made history? And we're not going to listen. It's very problematic, Mr. Speaker. This needs to be delayed indefinitely. We need to do our responsibilities and just listen to the voice of the people, Mr. Speaker, and make sure that we're the people's representatives. And for those reasons, Mr. Speaker, I support the motion to delay indefinitely.
Thank you very much. Further discussion on this measure? Yes, Representative Makazashiro.
Mr. Speaker, I rise in support of this motion.
Please proceed.
I think there's no secret in the building or outside the building, in the community, on the neighbor islands and the rural community, that I never supported coming to a special session. And to this very day, until we leave, I will stand on that objection. You know, I've told people this is the first time in my 20 years of being here, and I got elected back in 1994, that the governor has unilaterally used his authority, which is rightfully given to the Constitution, to summon the legislature into a special session like this. The other one was back in 2001, Mr. Speaker, and you were there with us, along with Speaker Emeritus Say and Governor Cayetano, and I think President Mizuguchi. We came into a special session to address the effects of the terrorist attacks upon our country. And then 6 years later, in 2007, we came in to address a Hawaii Supreme Court decision that basically stopped the super ferry from sailing between the islands. And what's interesting, Mr. Speaker, you and I were key members of that committee that had a public hearing on that particular issue. But one thing that you and I agreed upon, and will agree upon today, is that even in 2007, although we may have disagreed upon the merits of the bill, we had an agreement between the governor, who was Linda Lingo at the time, Speaker Emeritus Say, and I believe Senate President then Colleen Hanabusa, who's now a Congresswoman. But this is the first time I can recall in 20 years that a governor has unilaterally used his authority to summon us in. So that's where I start from. Mr. Speaker, I find it astounding that we would attempt to do this in such a short period of time, knowing that we've only used about 10 days, if even that, of 30 days unconditional. We have 45 days per approval by the governor. And that there's still some time to go and look at a constitutional amendment. There's still time to look at other amendments. There's still some time to approve this bill. There's still some time to seek clarification from the Attorney General, Civil Rights Commission, ACLU, just a few members that might have further questions. There's still some time to consult with alternatives regarding the ERISA exemption under our Prepaid Health Care Act. There's still some time to seek the input from the judiciary regarding the family court and how the rules and procedures might be changed with the domicile residency waiver for same-sex couples coming in. There's still some time for us to go and consult with other members of our community, especially in the neighbor islands. There's still some time, Mr. Speaker, we can go back and call a regular 5-day recess. In a regular session, we'll call that pursuant to Constitution, a 5-day recess, to consult with our communities, to reflect, and to seek their input. There's still some time for that. You know, throughout the last 8 weeks, Mr. Speaker, people have been asking me, what is the rush? What is the compelling rush? And that's part of the frustration. Initially, I voted for a constitutional amendment, Mr. Speaker, but normally I don't on these kind of issues. But I felt compelled to because of this process that's being rushed. I have grave reservations about the bias and prejudice of the community at large regarding the homosexual and gay community. And so if it is approved, I'll probably argue against it at the polls. But insofar as I've seen the same bias and prejudice among my own colleagues here in the House and Senate, I can ascribe no other recourse to address the Constitution as I see it, but again, turning to the wisdom of the people, from which all political power is derived. And so, whatever I might do to stop this special session, even on this procedural motion, for that reason I stand. I mean no umbrage against my colleagues or the senators. It lies with the governor. But again, members, Mr. Speaker, this might be a means for us to take pause and reflect before we make this final decision. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Representative. Further discussion on this item?
Mr. Speaker,
Yes, Representative Jordan.
I'd
Please
like to-
proceed.
thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'd like to speak in support.
Proceed.
I too, Mr. Speaker, came kicking, dragging, and screaming into this special session. My heart sunk when I heard that news on the TV that we were going to be in special session. And I've been pondering every day coming into this special session. And about a week before I got here, it all settled in me. It is what it is. We are here now. But when I saw the testimony of 5 days, and I only had one opportunity to talk to our AG in our hearing, one opportunity to talk to Department of Taxation, the deputy director, not even the director who has the experience of the Internal Revenue Service behind him. And we couldn't have another question asked of those administrative individuals with this institutional knowledge. Once we heard from all these constituents coming before us, we had to go and ask them separately. It's kind of difficult when we're sitting in hearings with the community expecting us to be there in those hearings and to listen to them when I need to go talk to individuals that have the expert knowledge on this. I too say we need to slow down, and no disrespect to our leadership, no disrespect to our great senators, no disrespect to our two chairs that held long hearings for us. I appreciate all that work. But I really would like to go out and talk to my community. Yesterday was the first day that I got to drive another block in my community and realized, oh my God, they're gonna fix my police station after 10 years. That's how much time I've spent here, Mr. Speaker, that I didn't even remember a block from my house and that they're gonna start a construction project. So how can I go out and listen from my constituents? I can't speak to them at 10 p.m. at night, Mr. Speaker. That's inappropriate. I like to talk people face to face. I don't wanna talk email to them. They wanna call me. And I have a difficult time explaining to them what is going on. Many of these people up here are from mine and Rapawana's district, Mr. Speaker. They want to see us. And I'm very appreciative they spent the last 5 days with us. I'm very humbled by that. And I do owe explanations to them before I take a final vote. Many of them expect me to go yes on this. Many of them expect me to go no. But if I can't have that discussion with them, how am I doing my duty, Mr. Speaker? And that was my turmoil coming into this. I must uphold the Constitution of the United States as well as the state. My oath of office to do my best ability. And right now, I'm not so sure if I'm doing my best ability when I can tell them, I'm sorry, we could only hear one bill. I'm sorry, we can't hear HB 5. I'm sorry, we can't hear HB 6. Why, Representative? Why can't you hear these other measures? I'm sorry, I've been told they're not going to hear them. And this is what happens when we can't explain to the public who brings us here. I just want faith. Faith in the government, and I want our people to have faith in our government. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
All right, thank you very much. Further discussion on this measure, Representative Hall.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. In support of the motion.
Please proceed.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, as we began this journey, many of the proponents said that as a result of the Supreme Court of the United States decision in the Winter case, that's how we ended up here. And respectfully, Mr. Speaker, I would submit this. The Supreme Court of the United States did not, in fact, find Hawaii in violation of any federal laws. So, as the members recall, when we began this journey, we did not have the requisite 34 votes to go back into special session. I repeat, there were not 34 members of the House of Representatives who were willing to go into special session to deal with this bill. Because our colleagues understood, number one, what the Supreme Court's decision was in DOMA, but secondly, that procedurally, it was not the right thing to do. Mr. Speaker, unfortunately, a member of our body did in fact go behind your back as the leader of our caucus and urge the governor to call us back into special session. As a result, we are here. And Mr. Speaker, again, nobody can deny what's been happening these past 5 days. This is the single most contentious, divisive issue of our history. We will undo thousands of years of culture, customs, tradition, and history, which is why the Native Hawaiian people are so upset and feel so disrespected by this process. Mr. Speaker, this motion is being brought because those of us in the minority feel desperate at this point. People keep saying, we don't trust government. Government doesn't listen to the people. Government can't be trusted. And we heard that in the testimony over the 5 days. Why are we not being heard? And so now we're stuck with this motion. Does it do justice for both sides? No. It doesn't do justice for the proponents, but we have no choice. We had choices at the beginning of this session, Mr. Speaker, and I would urge you, we still have choices. House Bill 5, House Bill 6, House Bill 7, they can still be heard. We have choices. It's not the end of special session at this point, Mr. Speaker. I don't want to stand in favor of this amendment, but I have no choice at this point. But we as a leadership still have choices. We can still allow the people to be heard, give them that choice so they don't believe that their government did not listen to the people. For those reasons, Mr. Speaker, I respectfully stand in support of the motion to postpone. Thank you
very much, Representative. Further discussion on this item? Yes, Representative Wano.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I stand in support.
Proceed.
Thank you, and I'd just like to include the words from the good representative from Kapolei into the journal as if they were my own.
So ordered.
Thank you.
Representative Evans.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I stand in opposition.
Please proceed.
Okay. I just want to note that, I looked back it up to see when the governor announced special session and what it was going to be about, and it was on it was on September 9th that he announced why we were coming back in special session on what the topic was going to be. And I know that in my community, the discussion started way back when. In terms of hearing what the people feel about this, it was with great honor. I'm proud of the House that we had over 5,000 people sign up to testify. That even in my emails, I started getting 3,000 emails a day last week, and I'm now averaging about 1,000 a day. It's tapered off a little bit, but I suspect that it'll go back up now that people know that we're going to go for third reading vote here soon, assuming that we pass this forward. And I really recommend that we pass this forward. And all the previous speakers says we're not listening to the people. And again, I want to say I do believe we're listening to the people and hearing from the people. And I do believe we should not support this motion. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Further discussion, members? If not, then Fukumoto, please.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. In support of the motion, I was going to save my comments for the underlying bill, but I think they're more fitting here because the major problem that I have with this bill is the process that we've taken it through. And this is not to malign anybody's character here. I think everybody tried really hard, but we were put here by the governor in a process that was impossible. We were never going to be able to do this well. And last night I said, that I did think that there was more transparency. And in that transparency, we saw how ugly this process actually is. The public being involved, and the public was able to see what actually happens in this building, Mr. Speaker. And they're unhappy with it. They didn't like what they saw. They're angry. And I think the best thing we can do at this point is just put this off and say, okay, we're going to give you a real process, a good process. Because when we ask for transparency, all we do is open it up so that more people can see what we do and how we do it. And what they've seen is that this process is unfair and that it's broken. And they're upset. And I think the only thing that we can do at this point is to give it more time, Mr. Speaker. So I ask that all the other members consider this motion to postpone. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Representative. Representative Bellotti.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise in opposition to this motion to postpone
Please
indefinitely. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. You know, I truly believe that the time for delay has come and gone. I'm genuinely sorry that we are at a point where we just have to agree to disagree. I do agree that this is the single most contentious, divisive measure that's come before this body, at least in the time that I've been in here. But I also believe that we are a duly elected legislative body who is called upon to make tough decisions. This is probably going to be the toughest vote of any of our political careers, but we are elected to do this job. We were called by the governor, September 9, 2013. The DOMA decision came down in July. The day the DOMA decision came down, with my understanding that this would be an issue that would come up, I began immediately to do my due diligence as a full-time legislator, as a full-time representative of the people in my district, to begin to understand what were the options in front of us. Over 30 of us sat in hearings. We listened, we heard, we amended the bill. We provided a bill that will satisfy many of the concerns that were raised. I'm very proud of the process that this House has engaged in, and I think, again, the time for delay has come and gone. Let us take the vote. Justice delayed is justice denied. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you very much. Further discussion on this measure. Second time, Representative.
Thank you,
Jordan.
Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, as we all know, Illinois just passed. The House of Representatives just voted it out. But do we all know that their Senate body voted it out in February? In February, Mr. Speaker, almost 6 months. I don't know why the delay was there. Maybe they had to garner the numbers, but at least they had a time to go out and talk to the people. The constituents in our state can't even look at SB1, HD1. They can't come back and comment on us. This is what I'm trying to express. True transparency. I mean, I can argue the point. I've been talking to my constituents since before DOMA fell. In fact, I was asked at a neighborhood board, how do you stand? Right after DOMA fell. And I've been engaging with my clergy, my pastors, my community members that had no clue what this was all about. You know, but now we do have a measure before us, and I feel it's my obligation to at least explain what the changes were made. You know, I don't think I have that opportunity at this point in time. You know, and I have a challenge. I don't even think this was being televised today, so I'm going to have more people saying, hey, what happened? I was supposed to be at a meeting right now. And somebody said, are you going to make it? And I said, no, I'm not. Well, what are you guys doing? Well, we're still on the floor because they couldn't hear it. Transparency, I'm sad to say that I'm going to have to just say, it is what it is. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you very much. Further discussion. Yes, Representative Brower.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. We've been talking about the issue of same-sex marriage since the conversation started over civil unions, and that's been a few years. And in my opinion, we're not undoing thousands of years of marriage tradition because we're not eliminating marriage between a man and a woman. If anything, the definition of marriage is growing. And ironically, Mr. Speaker, putting this off, we would be undoing decades of how we've done local legislative processes here in Hawaii. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Representative Fale. This is your second time?
Yes, Mr. Speaker. Once again in support and just with a brief rebuttal.
proceed.
We've been told that we need to accept same-sex marriage, Mr. Speaker, because we need to aloha all. But the people who make aloha what it is cannot be trusted to vote on that. So we come to you because of who you are, what you represent, and the unique culture that you have in the state of Hawaii. But that's nice. We're not going to trust you to actually voice with aloha how you feel on this measure. This delay, Mr. Speaker, will allow that opportunity. Those are local people outside. You hear those voices? Those aren't people from Connecticut. Those aren't people from Massachusetts. Those aren't people from Washington. Those are people born and raised in these islands who foster, who nurture, who care for what we call aloha. And we're saying, we can't trust you. We can't trust you to share aloha. And we say, we come out, trust us, guys.
Would you please restrict yourself to the merits of this bill, which is
yes,
to postpone indefinitely, whether it's meritorious or not, and the particular nuances with the bill?
Yes, Mr. Speaker, and that goes exactly to my point. SB1 HD1 came out yesterday, and the only people from my community who have had a chance to look at it, Mr. Speaker, which isn't everybody, because everybody isn't paid to do the political thing that we're paid to do, Mr. Speaker. They're busy living their lives, who haven't had the opportunity, who haven't even gotten a break from work, school, or family to look at this bill, haven't had an opportunity to look at it. And we're supposed to say, hey, just trust us. We the guys who passed PLDC over here. Trust us. What I'm saying, Mr. Speaker, is that not enough time has passed. And we have scrambled to repeal bills that have gotten less outrage than what we're seeing today. And we are just railroading this through. What a time to be a freshman, Mr. Speaker. Can you remember those days when you were a freshman, Mr. Speaker? What a time to be a freshman, Mr. Speaker.
My friend, too long ago. Please continue.
So what I'm saying is, Mr. Speaker, District 47 and the people who live there have not been able to review what has been done, and the few who have said that the amendments that have made have been inadequate. And too many times have we had to backtrack and try and fix mistakes because we moved things through that shouldn't have been moved through. And there is no excuse, there is no reason, when we know we have 30 days. The people know we have 30 days. But because somebody said, first word, we are just going to pass this through.
Mr. Speaker, point of order.
Yes, take your point.
I believe the Speaker's out of time.
Okay, Representative, you've been called out of order. Will you please correct your remarks?
Okay. I just want to say, Mr. Speaker, I hope my time as a freshman will be just as good as yours was, and we do the right thing. Thank you very much,
Thank
Mr.
you very
Speaker.
much, Representative. All right, members, we've had sufficient debate on this to postpone indefinitely.
Mr. Speaker.
And there's been a call to, yes, Representative.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Just brief rebuttal. Mr.
Okay,
Speaker, the representative from Makiki said that she's proud of this process, that we heard, we listened, and we amended the bill. But Mr. Speaker, I would submit the overwhelming voices that resonated for me in that hearing, and she sat right next to me, was not amend the bill. It was vote no, kill the bill, let the people decide. That was, the people did not ask to amend the bill. That was the overall message, Mr. Speaker. So when we talk about transparency, openness in government, public engagement, again, I will submit we are failing the public, and this is why people don't trust government. For these reasons, Mr. Speaker, I continue to support the motion to postpone indefinitely. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you very much. Further discussion? All right, Representative Marcus Oshiro.
Mr. Speaker,
Yes.
this is a quite extraordinary motion, as you know, because it has the effect of killing the bill in the process. But extraordinary circumstances require extraordinary measures like this. And there is a clear and present danger that we might do something that we can never undone. And I've been sharing this with the community at large and those colleagues who choose to seek out my counsel. But I too, like the representative from Makiki, have been studying the Defense of Marriage Act decision of the Supreme Court, the Kennedy decision. I've studied the Perry v. Schwarzenegger, the Hollingsworth decision that was entered at the close of the Supreme Court's last session. A couple of things I take away from it. First of all, in the Windsor case, there was no establishment of a fundamental right, of a civil right to same-sex marriage. It stands for this basic proposition of federalism. Where a state determines and defines marriage between a man and a woman or between people of same sex, Congress does not have the authority or the power to supersede the decision of the states. And Mr. Speaker, I agree with that decision. I think it's the prerogative of the states to decide that, how they define marriage. I think that's a correct decision. Also in the decision, Mr. Speaker, is this important point, that if a couple gets married in a state where you have same-sex marriage, and they move to a different state to domicile and set up their household and live as a couple, the same rights and privileges that they acquired in the celebration state or the celebration place will go with them. I talked about it earlier, but that's the basic premise of the Defense of Marriage Act case, the Windsor case. The Perry case is interesting, Mr. Speaker, and it stands for this proposition. It stands for this proposition, Mr. Speaker, that once the legislature approves same-sex marriage, and once the first marriage license is issued, there's no going back. You will have a vested property right that I will have to defend under the state constitution, that most courts will see under the state constitution. And to take that away would be a violation of one's due process. Life, liberty, property without due process. And that's what they held in the Perry Hollingsworth decision. Furthermore, even with Proposition 8, even with a constitutional amendment to change the decision of their court, even that could not change it. Because the basic principle there is, Mr. Speaker, once a property right is acquired by a person or group.
Representative, your time has passed.
I'll finish up.
And this is your second time.
I'll clear. It can never be taken away. And that's why this is a substantive motion, has substantive effects on where we are today. I stand again in strong support. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, Representative McDermott.
Mr. Speaker, I'll give you two concrete reasons why we shouldn't proceed. One, as you know, there's litigation pending on the meaning of the 1998 constitutional amendment. There's Supreme Court law that says the people's intent supersedes any committee report, any statutory language, any shenanigans buried deep inside. Well, we have had people, not me, acknowledge that the language was, well, bad at best, if not confusing. So we have litigation pending, number one. Number two, despite the best efforts of leadership, and you're all good people, there have been a blizzard of rules, House rules violated, unintentionally, most of them. Secondly, according to Masons, when rules are violated and or there's an act of bad faith, that statute can be thrown out. Now I refer you, sir, to earlier this week when we went through and this is why we should adjourn and not come back, the membership kerfluffle in here that we had. House rules were never waived. Two House rules were never waived relating to minority rights to reorganize and committee rights. That in itself alone is not fatal. But what, Mr. Speaker, I'm giving you a reason why we should adjourn pending legal action. If you'd like me to explain it, I can. I think it might give you pause and members of your caucus pause. Okay, I have one lawsuit. I've got another one in the queue.
Please proceed.
The committee assignments, the majority replaced a known no through public utterances with a known yes through public utterances. Subsequently, we tried to replace a known no through public utterances with a known yes with a known no. We were forbidden for doing that, so the deck was effectively stacked against us, relieving us of the dynamic that might occur in a one-vote split, where that person who cast the deciding vote would be the person who cast the deciding vote. So you see, that's the bad faith issue. We weren't allowed to do what we wanted to do. You never polled the members, Mr. Speaker. You never polled the minority members to see how they felt. A verbal assurance is not the same thing as someone being on record. You were also sent a letter. So the actions spoke of bad faith. That and the blizzard of violation of rules provides and I'm not insulting you, sir. I love you, you know that. The action itself, it provides a basis for legal action because it's an extraordinary circumstance. So you have two issues, one currently under litigation and one that could come of litigation as soon as we get rolling through tomorrow. So you have, a prudent man would pause.
Thank you very, very much. Members, I believe we've had sufficient debate. There's been a call for the question, and by a voice vote, no, by a roll call. So, clerk, will you check if you have the required votes for a roll call? All right, all those in favor of a roll call, please raise your right hand.
Mr. Speaker, there are sufficient numbers for a roll call vote.
There aren't sufficient votes. Okay, thank you very much. So we're going into a voice vote.
Speaker?
We're going
Speaker,
into
point
a
of
voice
information.
vote.
Speaker, point of information. There are people missing on the floor here.
It's a voice vote.
Speaker, point of information. Before you take this vote, there's people missing. Is the quantity the same as needed before? I counted 11 votes. And there are people missing and excused. Therefore, the equation changes.
I'm very sorry. I apologize. I misunderstood. I thought we had sufficient from what I heard from the clerk. You have enough votes. I've been advised of that. So, Mr. Clerk, will you call a roll, please?
Mr. Aquino.
Yes.
Ms. Awana.
Yes.
Ms. Bellotti.
No.
Mr. Brower.
No.
Ms. Cabanilla.
What's your vote, Cabanilla?
Yes, Mr. Speaker.
Mr. Cachola.
Excuse.
Ms. Carroll.
Yes.
Mr. Choi.
Excuse.
Mr. Kaufman.
No.
Mr. Cullen.
Yes.
Ms. Evans.
No.
Mr. Fale.
Yes.
Ms. Fukumoto.
Yes.
Ms. Hanohano.
No.
Ms. Har.
Yes.
Mr. Hashem.
No.
Ms. Ichiyama.
No.
Mr. Ng.
No.
Mr. Ito.
Yes.
Mr. Johansson.
Yes.
Ms. Jordan.
Yes.
Mr. Kawakami.
No.
Mr. Kobayashi.
No.
Mr. Lee.
No.
Ms. Lowen.
No.
Ms. Luke.
No.
Ms. Matsumoto.
Aye.
Mr. McDermott.
Yes.
Mr. McKelvey.
No.
Mr. Mizuna.
No.
Ms. Morikawa.
No.
Mr. Nakashima.
No.
Mr. Nishimoto.
No.
Mr. Ono.
No.
Mr. Onishi.
No.
Mr. Oshiro.
Yes.
Mr. Rhodes.
No.
Mr. Saiki,
No.
Mr. Say,
No.
Mr. Takai,
No.
Mr. Takayama,
No.
Mr. Takumi,
No.
Ms. Thielen,
No.
Mr. Tokioka,
Yes.
Mr. Tsuji,
Yes.
Mr. Ward,
Yes.
Mr. Woodson, yes. Ms. Woolley,
No.
Mr. Yamane,
Yes.
Mr. Yamashita,
No.
Mr. Speaker.
No.
Mr. Speaker, we count 19 ayes, 30 noes, and 2 excused.
Thank you very much. Motion is defeated. We're back on the original motion. So, discussion on this.
Speaker, Mr. Speaker,
Yes.
can we have a short recess?
Recess. All right, the House comes to order. We continue discussion on Stand-Come Report number 4. Discussion before we call the vote. Shall I call for the vote?
Mr. Speaker,
Yes. Representative,
I'll keep it very brief.
please.
It's the first time I've stood up today.
Yes, dear. Please proceed.
In opposition, I just wanted to say a few brief comments. On this floor, we often hear the statement, my community feels, or my constituents feel, but how can we say with certainty what our constituents feel? As a young legislator, I believe in public involvement, and that's why I was so encouraged this last week to see how many people came out on both sides to have their voice be heard. I didn't sit on the committee, I'm not on finance or judge, and so instead I went around and thanked each and every person for coming out and gave them a Snickers or a Kit Kat, because I believe in public involvement. And many members of this body have made the point that a vote is the greatest equalizer, and I believe that. We also talk about in 1998 vote. In 1998, I was 11 years old, Speaker. I was not old enough to vote.
I won't tell you how old I was. Okay, go on.
We'll keep that a secret then. And I believe there's an entire generation that wasn't old enough to vote on this issue. And on something that is so polarizing, I feel that it's so important to put it in the people's hands of Hawaii. I'm not against equal benefits, but I am for putting it to a public vote. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Representative. Further discussion on this major. Yes,
Speaker.
Representative McDermott.
Can we have a brief recess just for a minute?
Recess. All right, members, further discussion? Yes, Representative Johnson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I know I've said a lot today. Some of it was meant for right now. So I won't put you through that. People have been here for a long time today, probably earlier than I got here. But, you know, Mr. Speaker, everybody's heard my vote. They heard what I voted. I'm going to stand by my vote in opposition to SB1, HD1. I just want to share with you, Mr. Speaker. There was a woman that came on Halloween evening and testified. And I hadn't seen this woman maybe 20 years. You see, Mr. Speaker, I was so amazed. There was many people that I hadn't seen in 13 years and 10 years. And it's not because we're not friends. It's just that we all get busy with our lives. And I'm like, wow. And some of them move out of our communities. You don't see them any longer. But I was quite surprised and very honored that these people remembered me and came up to me. And they didn't even realize I was a legislator at this point in time in my life. This woman that came and spoke obviously in opposition to the measure. She went home because some things were said to her out in the hallways. See, she didn't know me on a personal level. She knew me on my professional level. And I didn't know her on her personal level. I knew her family because it's quite large. And she had mentioned that she had a sister-in-law that was in the hospital with a massive stroke. So I took it upon myself to go outside and say hello and which sister-in-law were you talking about. Well, while she was out there waiting to testify, there were some people chattering in the halls. And it was so amazing to see people for and against chattering out in those halls and coming to some kind of understanding. And I think that's what we really need to do, Mr. Speaker. There's a lot of people that do support this issue. They just don't know a lot about it right now. And many people testify we should be doing some ho'oponopono, and I don't disagree to that. But I'm not going to share the whole email with you because it does get rather personal. But she felt compelled, after what was said about me in the hallway, to write me. And she even apologized for writing me. But at the end of it, she said, "Is this an act? Will you sincerely vote according to all the testimonies given, or have you already decided to vote for SB1 because of pressures you may sustain if you don't support it?" Mr. Speaker, she was talking about my personal life. I felt so bad for her. I cried. Yes, Mr. Speaker, I sat in my office and cried when I read this. And I'm still trying to figure out the words to respond to her. Because I owe her. No, nobody's going to beat me up. Nobody's going to throw me out of my GLTV community. I'm not quite sure of that. But I do owe a response to her. And yes, for her satisfaction, I listened to the testimony. I kept my heart and my conscience clear. I set aside my personal beliefs. I said that on the day I stood at that rostrum being sworn in 3 years ago. I will set aside any of my personal beliefs, any of my personal thoughts, even if I can benefit from this. And I listen to individuals, I listen to testimonies, I listen to experts, and I might vote against something that I personally believe in. I personally believe I should have the right. You know how hard it is for me to say no? I have to say no. And I said it earlier. If I need to uprise minorities, I cannot erode anybody else's rights. And I personally haven't come to that in the current measure we have before us, Mr. Speaker. I always have my 4 agreements with me. Be impeccable with my word.
Mr. Speaker?
Yes.
I'll use my time.
My 4 agreements.
Shorter.
My 4 agreements that I've shared with you guys twice up at that rostrum with invocations. And I always go back to it. In fact, I have my book with me so I can remind myself, because there were some hurtful things said in those hearings that weren't directed at me because they didn't understand. Be impeccable with my word. Don't take anything personal, Mr. Speaker. And I didn't. I walked away from those hearings not taking anything personal. Don't make assumptions. Everybody made an assumption about who I was and how I was going to vote on this issue. Shame on everybody, including the media and my fellow legislators here. Don't you have faith in me? Always do my best. I'm doing my best. Yes, I am who I am, and I'm speaking on this floor, doing the best I can. And I will vote no, as the measure is written. And I'm praying that it can be resolved. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you very much, Representative. Representative Johansson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise in opposition.
Please proceed.
This has been a very emotional and difficult issue for both the public to grapple with, as well as all of us in the legislature here. I do think we are called to make difficult decisions, and I think that is what we are all trying to do. I, like many, do not necessarily want to see people in loving relationships denied certain benefits. But I also think that that can be accomplished in ways that we have yet to explore, because it is not necessarily expedient in this special session. I personally think that relief may also come at the federal level if the IRS or the federal government were to just expand its definition of what would be included for federal tax benefits. I think there are myriad ways that we can potentially try to redress a lack of equitability in benefits. This bill, however, in ostensibly trying to grant those benefits, engenders what I think are a whole host of unresolved and unreconciled issues that we are all still grappling with today. My opposition to this bill primarily rests on 2 points. Firstly, this bill does not reconcile the natural tension that is created with the passage of this bill between a newly created state-sanctioned right and First Amendment rights as guaranteed in our time-honored federal Constitution. What happens when they conflict? How do we reconcile them? I'm not sure that any one of us, 51 members, knows how to answer those questions with certainty. And I understand that we may not have those answers. But because this fundamental clash will exist, those answers are things that we need to struggle with, and we need to find, and we need to ascertain with some degree of certainty before moving forward in this course. Secondly, I also feel that in a democracy, how do we potentially dismiss the will and the consent of the governed? I don't think we can, nor should we. Under normal circumstances in this body, the sheer level of opposition to this issue would have been enough to, at the very least, warrant additional time and consideration, if not doom the bill. I wholly recognize that many good people will disagree with what I'm saying, but in deference to all of the disagreement, the unreconciled issues, and a bill that may contravene the people's will, I must respectfully oppose this bill. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Representative. Further discussion? Yes, Representative Brower, please.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. In support?
Proceed.
I believe, members, if you support the bill, you will find a way to vote up. And if you don't support it, you'll find a way.
See this turnout probably, Mr. Speaker, in my entire career in politics. Probably not a single person in this room will ever see what happened at this time, Mr. Speaker.
Mr. Speaker, I yield my time.
Okay, so
So it just doesn't make sense to me. And it doesn't make sense to anybody, whether they're for or against this. Why are you going to pummel this through? I believe that the message we have been sent merits a little more time. Merits a little more discussion, merits a little more debate, merits maybe a couple visits to the neighbor islands. We're exhausted. The only reason why we're delayed as far as we are is because the people of Hawaii decided to speak. And so here we are today. We know that the intention was to rush this through much faster. And the only reason why it didn't get rushed through the way it was intended was because the people of Hawaii took a stand and said, 1 second. So I cannot dishonor the amount of effort, the children who slept on cold concrete floors, the mothers and fathers who gave up hundreds of dollars of work. We understand, I don't know if we understand what they went through. Through this entire process, we were paid to be here. And for those thousands of people who came, cars towed, parking tickets, hundreds of dollars, well, maybe that's hundreds of dollars good to the city or whoever collects the money out of the parking meters. But nobody, that time that was spent here, nobody's going to give that time back to the people. Nobody's going to give that money back to the people. And nobody is going to be able to wipe away the memory from those children who came here and learned the lesson that even if you come speak with all your heart, might, mind, and strength to your legislature, they will not listen. Nobody can remove that. That's going to go down in the history books, Mr. Speaker, right along. Record turnout at legislature in the state of Hawaii. Nothing changed. I think it merits further discussion. This bill shouldn't go through right now. And people should give, this legislature should give the people of Hawaii a little more credit, as we just received a lesson about from the good representative from Waianae. Let's give people a little more credit. That's all I have to say.
Thank you very much. Further discussion. Representative Brower, second time.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Just briefly, the previous legislator talked about us creating division and hurt. And I would ask members, if you sat in the auditorium in the last few days, who do you think has experienced more hurt in their lives? The people wearing the leis or the people not wearing the leis? And who has demonstrated more anger throughout these processions? And that's just a rhetorical question. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you very much, Representative. Further discussion, Representative Evans, and then Ames.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I stand in support of the bill.
Please proceed.
You know, I just want to say that the people that showed up to talk were for it and against it, but they all came and they participated in the government and what democracy is all about. And that was very exciting for me to see that. And you know, I've been at the legislature for 11 years, and I've always seen people get involved at whatever level they want to get involved on issues that somehow grab them. I know we had just as many people show at the legislature, and just as much chanting, just as much rallying over a GMO taro bill that we had some years back. So there's issues that grab the community, grab them, and we don't know what they'll ever be. You know, we introduce bills, we introduce thoughts, we introduce ideas. And so I don't see this at all like the other legislator that spoke before. I see this as a very exciting time in Hawaii's history, and that is where people became more empowered, learning how to have a voice, and learning a lot more about democracy and what our process is about. I've always told people when I talk to people in my community, it's really interesting how the West Hawaii Today talks an awful lot about the council meetings and what's happening at the council level. You always hear about the roads and the dogs barking, you know, and land use, some land use decision about a development, you know, like this rail transit, you're going to hear about it because it's a local issue. Now, how about the congressional? You know, Obama has, you know, he talks about things, the federal government, they talk about things and they get a lot of press. But I'll tell you, West Hawaii Day normally doesn't talk a whole lot about what we do at the state level. You know, the type of stuff that we vote on, the issues that we try to pass. We get very little coverage. But this one got an awful lot of coverage. And when it got coverage, it engaged people, they found their voice. I'm telling you, hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of people wrote emails or called from my district. It was very exciting to understand that people finally felt that I really want to weigh in on this. I really want to say what I want to say. And to me, it was just exciting. And to think this won't happen again, of course it will. Physician-assisted suicide, gambling, issues like that that just pull and tug on people and their beliefs. We'll have this again. I want to say for the freshmen that came here, my goodness, who would have thought your freshman year you would, be involved in something of this magnitude? But, we can't ever predict. But I want to say for the people that took the time to network, to get the word out across the state and tell them to get involved, they did a fabulous job. And, there were so many people that were for it and so many people that were against it, and then a lot of people that were just saying, can you find balance? Can you give civil rights, equal rights, and at the same time protect the church? So I really believe this bill tried to find the balance, and I'm very pleased that the Judiciary and the Finance members and the chairs really weighed in on what I believe is a bill that tried to strike that balance. For that reason, I support the bill. Thank you.
All right, Representative, thank you very much. Representative Ng.
I'll reserve my comments for a later time, but I ask for permission to answer written comments.
Thank you very much. Further discussion, second time,
Yes,
Representative
Speaker,
Ward.
just a couple of more comments. Speaker, I think the phenomenon that we're witnessing is rare, but it's where I think a lot of people came as people who wanted to remind us that we've already told you guys about this, but I'll show up and I'll try to reinforce it and let you know that, look, this is what we voted on and this is what you should be doing. And unfortunately, Mr. Speaker, I don't think that they're going to be satisfied with how we voted today or what direction we are now headed in. I find the difficulty is where they're not going to know where to turn. And I think the one thing that is the big result of these 5 days is that they have reached political puberty over 5 days of seeing the legislative process. You can make up what you want of what political puberty is, but to me, it's an awakening to the political process, which they've seen very close, which they've tried to be convincingly influencing, which they found that they have not been able to. And because of that, and now that they are aware of the system, their eyes are open, we have got to be prepared for the consequences of that. And I think that's where things may be turned. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
All right, Representative, thank you very much. We've had very extensive debate on this issue, and I think I'll have two more people, or three more that I see, and then we'll call for the question. Representative Makabashiro, this is your second time?
No, it's
Or
my
your
first
third
time. This is my first time, but I'll defer to the member from the Makiki area. Thank you. I just want to make sure I have some time, Mr. Speaker.
All right, fine. Okay, from Representative Bert Kobayashi.
Mr. Speaker, I'd like to speak in support.
Please proceed.
I'd like to explain what I think has been a major problem. We have come from such passionate and different points of view that we are unable to see past our own beliefs. We believe we are right, each of us, whether we're on this side or on that side. And in a sense, we have gotten to the point where almost no information, no statement can change our beliefs. Justice Levinson, in Joint Committee in the auditorium, said in response to a question, people believe what they want to believe. Now, on 4 points, I think this is true. 1 point, what is the majority? Number 2 point, is homosexuality a lifestyle choice or somehow rooted in our biology? And on that point hinges the question of whether this is a civil rights or not. The third point is people's understanding of God, church, and faith, particularly Christian faith, as was so often mentioned in the auditorium. And the fourth point is process. Is the process fair? Now, I don't want to get too academic, but some of us know something about something called cognitive dissonance. And cognitive dissonance is that when we have a discrepancy or a conflict between two things, one set of beliefs and perhaps another set of information or beliefs, we try our hardest to preserve our beliefs and reject or explain away or avoid the new information and the new beliefs and the new things that might change our beliefs. And this, I think, is what has happened on those 4 points. Who is the majority? Lifestyle choice or not? Belief in church, God, faith, and is the process fair? I don't think there's anything that we can say right now that will change many people's minds, because we are clinging to our own beliefs, and we are protecting those beliefs by shutting out, by avoiding, negating everything else that is contrary to our beliefs. And I'm afraid that is often the case in many things. I once was involved in a very difficult issue having to do with traffic. And many people in many islands have said, traffic is just terrible, terrible in their island, whether it's Kauai or Big Island or Maui or Honolulu, East Honolulu or West Honolulu. Well, you know, there's a notion of a perceived rightness, a perceived majority. People believe sometimes that there is a majority based on what they see. And sometimes we believe that we have the worst or one of the worst traffic jams because of what we see. We see cars around us all the time. We see the time ticking away. Of course, you can measure traffic jams, but then you get into an argument, how do you measure it, you know? There's a big difference between commuting on the Big Island and commuting here. So,
Speaker, I'll yield my time.
I appreciate that. But nonetheless, I would submit that there is much to say about the huge outpouring of real people that showed up in the auditorium. The level of commitment, the level of intensity, the level of passion was huge. But we have seen similar situations where this gallery has been packed on other issues. And we don't know whether those people in the gallery represent the majority. I can remember union issues where you had people all over. And I can tell you, sitting here, I couldn't tell you whether the union members there represented the majority of the people. I can remember the Hawaii Convention Center, if you remember that.
Very much so.
I mean, that had a demonstration upstairs, the likes of which far exceeded what we saw out there. I mean, literally, people thought that the floor was going to collapse because the thundering and the numbers of people were so huge. So, the difficulty, of course, is that with a cognitive dissonance kind of thing, a perceived majority becomes a self-reinforcing perceived majority. And I think that cannot be avoided. We each here, legislators, I hope, are of sound judgment, sincere belief to do the public good, and I think have paid great attention to the details of the bill, to the arguments left and right, and exercised their very best to come up with a decision, yes or no. And I think the people have to respect that, because I believe that legislators here have tried their best, are sincere, and want to do the public good. But we have a fundamental difference that perhaps cannot be bridged in terms of our beliefs and how we are protecting these beliefs on those 4 points I mentioned. And I would suggest to you that we have to say at the end that we tried our level best to figure out who was the majority in each of our districts and in the state of Hawaii. That we looked at the question of whether homosexuality is a lifestyle choice or not. That we heard people express their understanding of God, church, and faith. And of course, there were many churches there, some here and some there. And lastly, that we believe that we looked at the process, and while any process is not perfect, it was a fair process. So on these 4 points, I think you have to give the legislators here who are going to vote the benefit of the doubt that they did their very best in coming up with their decision. So on that basis, I would suggest that we continue with discussion and respect that we all have differences in our beliefs, and we all have differences in the facts that we choose to support our beliefs. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Representative. Representative Walker.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Can I ask for a point of information, Mr. Speaker?
Take your point.
As a neighbor island representative, and there's many of us in here, is third reading going to be televised on Olelo? Because if it is,
Yes, it's going to
if it is, then I will reserve my comments for third reading.
I appreciate that. Thank
But
you very
Mr.
much.
Speaker, as I have the floor right now, I want to make a couple of things. I rise in opposition to the bill. Second point, and the most important point for me of the day, is today is my daughter's 14th birthday. And well, she's not watching because it's not on, but I want to wish her a happy birthday. And in case I forget, I do want to put in written comments, Mr. Speaker. So thank you for allowing the opportunity for Olelo to broadcast this, because the people from my district, and I'm sure on every neighbor island, want to see what we're doing. And I think most people know me. I'm not a camera hugger, but they want to know what we have to say. So thank you very much, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you very much, Representative. And Representative Representative Aquino. And we'll go down
Thank
the
you,
line.
Mr. Speaker. No vote, please.
So ordered. Representative
Same request.
yes, no vote. Okay.
Mr. Speaker.
Colin and Representative Ryan.
Speaker, standing up in opposition. Very brief comment.
Take your position.
Mr. Speaker, my opposition is a reflection of my community, Mr. Speaker. My community has contacted me in various ways, and we have a clear ratio of over 3.5 to every one support in opposition, Mr. Speaker. And my staff, Danielle, can attest to that. She went through hundreds and thousands of phone calls, emails, postcards, and letters all around her planning of a wedding to make sure that every voice in our community was recorded. Mr. Speaker, as we have to decide how we're going to choose if we're voting up or no, a lot of people have stated on this floor that they're making it because of maybe their perception of this value, their perception of that value. However, Mr. Speaker, I want it to be noted that I've talked to many people, many of our colleagues in this chamber. I've talked to social workers for and against, doctors for and against. I've talked to my students who are for and against. And many people have expressed very deep feelings about the definition of marriage. Mr. Speaker, I think as we went through this process, you've heard families, parents, fearful of what this measure would do, as well as we've heard of those people who have felt that their rights and privileges were denied. And Mr. Speaker, to both of those sides, we feel for you. We acknowledge that you have a value and your voice is heard. But Mr. Speaker, as many of us are here and contemplating our final vote that'll come up hopefully in a couple of days, I just wanted to note that, Mr. Speaker, in many of our communities, this is an issue. This has drawn out a lot of discussion both at home and amongst the community, right, Mr. Speaker? And many of us here have to decide which vote is more important, those that are for and those that are against. I even asked my wife what her position is, but because I see her every day, does she equate to 10 people in the community, right? I have to live with her, right? So you should take her opinion a little bit more than others. However, Mr. Speaker, as I struggle to decide how I would take every vote, every opinion, every rationale behind this moral or ethical, religious, and civil rights issue, Mr. Speaker, it came down to looking at what I was charged to do as an elected official of my community. So, Mr. Speaker, on behalf of my community, I'm requesting that and written comments to be in opposition.
Thank you very much, Representative. Further discussion? Further discussion. Representative Marcus Oshiro.
Thank you very much, Speaker. I appreciate the opportunity to use the public forum of debate and discussion to articulate the concerns that I have in the most impassioned way I can, based upon my knowledge of the law and my reading of the Constitution. Just a couple of things to point out in the bill. I don't begrudge my colleagues because of the pressure they're put under to come out with something. It's different from the Senate draft. It's a little bit better, but it's far, far, far from perfect. It merely covers the solemnization ceremony, nothing more, nothing less. House Bill 6 covered everything what I call wall-to-wall within the religious establishment, whether it's a bar mitzvah, whether it's a baptism, whether it's a funeral, whether it's counseling, whether it's post or premarital support. It's just a solemnization of marriage. And non-religious solemnizers are not covered, the judges are not covered. That's concerns. Again, the House Bill draft covered employees and their freedom of conscience, freedom of religion outside of the church grounds in their public walk of life. So I have concerns about this, and I'll articulate it even more. Let's look at what's not covered here. Individuals of conscience who run a small business, such as a wedding planner, photographer, florist, banquet hall, or making wedding cakes even in one's home. That's like my neighbor. Can be sued under public accommodations law for refusing to offer their services in connection with the same-sex marriage ceremony. Religious daycare centers, counseling centers, meeting halls, and adoption agencies could be sued under public accommodations laws for refusing to offer their facilities or services to members of the same-sex marriage. A church or other religious nonprofit that dismisses an employee for entering into a same-sex marriage can be sued under employment discrimination laws to prohibit discrimination on the basis of marital status, directly conflicting with the current ministerial exemption under federal and state law. A religious college, hospital, social service organization that refuses to provide its employees with same-sex spousal benefits can be denied access to government contracts or grants on the grounds that it is engaging in discrimination that contravenes public policy. That provision is not in this draft, it is in House Bill 6. In other words, it protects the organizations, the churches, organizations of 501c3 to gain and have access to the public funds through grants contracts, etc. A religious charity or fraternal organization that opposes same-sex marriage can be denied access to government facilities, such as a lease on government property, or participate in a government-sponsored employee charitable campaign that has already occurred in several states. Doctors, psychologists, social workers, counselors, and other professionals who conscientiously object to same-sex marriage can have their license revoked. Religious fraternal organizations or other nonprofits that object to same-sex marriage can be denied food service license, adoption agency license, child care licenses, or liquor licenses on the grounds that they are engaged in unlawful discrimination. Religious colleges and professional schools can have their accreditation revoked for refusing to recognize the validity of same-sex marriage. Church-affiliated organizations can have their tax-exempt status stripped because of their conscientious objecting to same-sex marriage. Mr. Speaker, I know that the chair of the Judiciary Committee never intended that in his draft, but again, this is part and parcel of this ill-conceived, ill-advised special session that we're in to rush this thing through. It also leaves out protections for a religious organization for loss of government benefits for refusing to recognize same-sex marriage. It provides no protection for individual objectors other than ministers, priests, or other officials of the religious denomination or society. And it provides no protection to religious organizations from private lawsuits brought under Hawaii's non-discrimination laws other than for refusal to solemnize a marriage. It is not the most robust protections. The most robust protections are found in House Bill 6, based upon the learned scholar and research of the same-sex marriage religious liberty scholars in this text right here. I'm just going to wrap this thing up with some closing comments, Mr. Speaker. Conflicts between same-sex marriage and religious conscience are reasonably foreseeable, and for that very reason unnecessary when a prudent legislature acts decisively to protect complementary human values, liberty, and equality, by adopting language that enables both interests to be protected realistically. Without such legislative safeguards, many religious individuals will be forced to engage in conduct that violates their deepest religious beliefs. And religious organizations will be constrained in crucial aspects of their religious exercise. Hence, the legislature should take care to ensure that the legalization of same-sex marriage does not restrict the inalienable right of religious liberty. This is entirely consistent with the Hawaii State Constitution that each member of the state legislature has sworn to uphold and protect. Since its adoption in 1950 and ratification in 1959, the Hawaii Constitution has always protected religious freedom in the strongest of terms.
Mr. Representative, your time is left.
Mr. Speaker, I'll yield my time.
So,
Please.
And I cite, thank you very much, and I cited the Hawaii Constitution, Article 1, Section 4. No law shall be enacted respecting an establishment of religion or prohibiting the free exercise thereof. Hawaii Constitution, Article 1, Section 5, and this is a discussion I had with the Attorney General at the hearing last week. No person shall be denied the enjoyment of a person's civil rights or be discriminated against in the exercise thereof because of race, religion, sex, or ancestry. Race, I'm classified Japanese, my religion might be Christian, Buddhist. Sex, I'm like male. Ancestry, Okinawan. Sexual minorities and religious minorities make essentially parallel claims on the large society, Mr. Speaker. And the strongest features for a case for same-sex marriage makes an equally strong case for protecting the religious liberties of dissenters. These parallels have been elaborated by scholars who work principally on religious liberty, and also by scholars who work principally on sexual orientation. First, both same-sex couples and committed religious believers argue that some aspects of human identity are so fundamental that should be left to the individual, free of all non-essential regulation, even when manifested in conduct. For same-sex couples, the conduct at issue is to join personal commitment and sexual expression in a multifaceted, intimate relationship with the person they love. For religious believers, the conduct at issue is to live and act consistently with the demands made by the being, capital B, that they believe in and made us and holds the whole world together. No person who wants to enter same-sex marriage can change his sexual orientation by an act of will. And no religious believer can change his understanding of divine command by any act of will. Religious beliefs can change over time. Far less commonly, sexual orientation can change over time. But these things do not change because government says they must, or because the individual decides they should. Same-sex partners cannot change their sexual orientation, and the religious believer cannot change God's mind. In fighting rights to same-sex marriage, state courts have rejected a distinction between sexual orientation and sexual conduct because they have correctly found both orientation and conduct follows from the orientation central to the person's identity. Religious believers also face attempts to dismiss their claims as involving mere conduct outside the scope of any constitutional right and subject to any and all state regulation. This is the premise of denying judicial review to religiously burdened laws that are truly general applicability. But believers cannot fail to act on God's will. And it is no more reasonable for the state to demand that they do so for the state to demand celibacy of all gays and lesbians. Both religious believers and same-sex couples feel compelled to act on these things, part and parcel of their identity. Both same-sex couples and religious dissenters also seek to live out their identities in public. Same-sex couples claim a right beyond private behavior in their homes. They claim the right to participate in social institutions of civil marriage. Likewise, religious believers claim a right to follow their faith, not just in worship service, but also in the charitable services provided through the religious organization and in their daily lives. Finally, both same-sex couples and religious dissenters face the problems that what they experience among the highest virtues is condemned by others as grave evil. Indeed, Mr. Speaker, I've shared this many, many times. They share so much in common. Both are distinct, discrete minorities. Where same-sex couples see loving commitments of mutual care and support, many religious believers see discordant conduct that violates natural law and scriptural command. And where those religious believers see obedience to a loving God who undoubtedly knows best when he lays down rules for human conduct, many supporters of gay rights see intolerance, bigotry, and hate. Because gays and lesbians and religious conservatives are each viewed as evil by a substantial portion of the population, each is subject to substantial risk of intolerance and unjustifiable burdensome regulations. There is no reason to let either side oppress the other, Mr. Speaker. Same-sex couples can have civil rights, and the state should not force dissenting religious organizations to recognize and facilitate same-sex marriage.
Will you please wrap it up?
Yes, Mr. Speaker.
Mr. Speaker.
I'm giving the extra time for the representative to wrap it up.
Yeah,
Is
it's
there a
over
point
10
of order?
minutes, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you very much. Okay, please wrap it up.
Mr. Speaker, when the Defense of Marriage Act was issued, our president, our own Kiki Okaina, President Obama, made a statement. He applauded the decision of the United States Supreme Court. But in the same proclamation or issuance of his public statement, he made this comment, that as we move forward based upon the Supreme Court's ruling, we cannot and should not overextend and abridge the freedom of religions that are protected within state and our federal constitution. And I think we should take wise and heed the advice of our president, Obama, our own Keiki Okaina. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Okay, thank you very much. I think we've had extensive
Mr. Speaker?
debate, and the chair now is going to be asking for you to submit, if you want to submit your comments to the for record rather than a debate. We'll be exclusively for that. I think we've had extensive debate for the last 7 hours or so.
Mr. Speaker?
Yes,
May I
Representative.
please be allowed to speak, Mr. Speaker? This is the single most contentious issue of our time.
Well, I
realize.
understand. It's a
Thank you,
very
Mr. Speaker.
important
I would
bill.
appreciate if you would recognize me to please
Well,
speak in
then you shall be the
opposition.
last one. Let it be known. Okay, please proceed.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise in opposition to Senate Bill 1, House Draft 1, and in fact, Standing Committee Report number 4. Mr. Speaker, I rise in opposition first and foremost. On page 7 of Standing Committee Report number 4, it states, the United States Supreme Court's recent decision in United States versus Windsor held the Federal Defense of Marriage Act unconstitutional on the grounds that it violates basic due process and equal protection principles. Mr. Speaker, the fact of the matter is this: the United States Supreme Court did not invalidate or find DOMA unconstitutional. They found Section 3 unconstitutional. So this is a misrepresentation. This is factually incorrect information. So I would submit that this committee report has factually incorrect information and should be changed. Again, nobody can dispute the Supreme Court did not strike down DOMA. The Supreme Court only held that Section 3 was unconstitutional. So respectfully, Mr. Speaker, I have asked that the committee report be amended to accurately reflect the facts. Secondly, Mr. Speaker, I object to the passage of Senate Bill 1, House Draft 1, because of the process. You know, going back to the committee report, Mr. Speaker, on page 4, the Standing Committee report says, your committees find that the over 20-year history of Hawaii's consideration of this issue is particularly relevant in light of the concerns expressed by some testifiers that the condensed time frame of a special session is inadequate to address such an important issue. You know, Mr. Speaker, let's look at the facts once again. You know I'm an attorney, I can't help myself. Mr. Speaker, first and foremost, the last time this issue was discussed was in 1997, 1998, when you, Mr. Speaker, were in office at that time. Let's look at the numbers. Of the 51 members in the House of Representatives, only 10 members were a part of this body in 1997, 1998, when we were having this discussion. So the fact of the matter is, when people say we've been debating this issue, we, the 41 of us, have not debated this issue. And so when people say, no, civil unions, we discussed it in civil unions. Mr. Speaker, as I recall, civil unions were not marriage. We did not have the debate on same-sex issue in civil unions. And that was made very clear when we voted on that bill. The fact of the matter is this: no same-sex marriage bill has been heard since 1997. So to say we've been debating this issue amongst all of us is factually incorrect. Consequently, Mr. Speaker, because no bill has been heard since 1997, the public has not had an opportunity to be engaged in the issue of same-sex marriage. Yes, they may have debated it outside. Maybe, you know, the public just talked about it at the dining room table at the cooler. But the fact of the matter is, the public has not had an opportunity to weigh in on a bill since 1997. Secondly, Mr. Speaker, regarding the process. You know, I'm sad to say this. This was raised earlier. I think some of the members know that had we let the process ensue, that perhaps a different result may have come out of the Judiciary Committee. I don't want to embarrass anyone, but we all know what happened on the Judiciary Committee. We refused to respect the wishes of the minority, which, in my opinion, is unprecedented. As far as I'm concerned, we always rubber stamp whatever the minority does. We respect what they want with respect to their lineup. We replaced a member on the Judiciary Committee who was a well-known no vote with a yes vote. So I would submit, had we let the process ensue, we could be in a very different situation right now, Mr. Speaker. We refused to hear House Bill 5, House Bill 6, and House Bill 7. Again, Mr. Speaker, why? We're in special session. When the outcome is preordained, has the process really been respected? You know, we had a lot of debate over the infamous, now defunct, Public Land Development Corporation. And at that time, which, by the way, I'd like to note, was passed in regular session. And at that time, people screamed, we listened to the people. We repealed PLDC because we listened to the people. We don't like PLDC because it's not transparent. There's no openness in government. It doesn't allow the public to be engaged. It violates the public process. And the same people who waved that flag to repeal PLDC have no comment on this issue when it comes to the public. You know, Mr. Speaker, as an attorney, and many of these who are attorneys in this room, when we prepare for a substantive motion, it takes months and months of preparation.
Mr. Speaker, I'll yield my time.
Sure. Thank you, Speaker Emeritus. And it takes months and months of time. And as such, before we go before a judge, oftentimes that judge doesn't make a decision immediately, Mr. Speaker. What the judge does is takes it under advisement. And we have to wait.
Point of order, Mr. Speaker. She's over her time. The representative, Speaker Emeritus, has already used up his 2 moments to speak.
Are you my time?
Sure. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Representative. And so, Mr. Speaker, I'll wrap it up, Mr. Speaker. I will wrap it up. You know, again, the judge rarely ever immediately grants that motion then and there after oral arguments. We often have to wait weeks before we have a decision. And here in this situation, after 57 plus hours of testimony, approximately an hour and a half later, we went into decision making. We had a new House Draft 1 and we voted the bill out. Did we really read the 15,000 pieces of testimony that we got? It's the equivalent of 3 reams of Xerox paper. Did we do our due diligence? You know, Mr. Speaker, I think the thing that frustrates me the most in this entire process was a young girl who I met along the way, and she testified, Nora Ng. She was number 2585. And I asked her, well, what's the big deal if we pass this bill during this special session? She said, if you pass this, it proves that our government doesn't care. Our government doesn't listen. Our government is disgusting. Mr. Speaker, I don't want to be a part of a disgusting government. I want our public to be proud of us. And again, I submit, I truly believe that Q mark poll is correct. One of our members went on television touting that Q mark poll. I believe that the people of Hawaii have in fact changed their views. So what is the harm in allowing them to vote? For these reasons, Mr. Speaker, I respectfully stand in opposition. Thank you.
All right, thank you very much. Yes, Representative.
Mr. Speaker, I know I already yielded my time, so I just wanted to register my opposition. In addition to, since I didn't get the opportunity to speak for myself, I wanted to adopt the words of the representatives from Kapolei, Laie, Moana Loa, as well as both representatives from Mililani, minus our senior representative's comments about his wife. Thank you.
All right, thank you very much. Yes, members, I've already mentioned that we've had sufficient debate at this point. Unless you want to put your remarks for the record, I will not accept you for speaking at this point. Representative Terrell.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I will respect your request, and I will reserve my comments for third reading, but if I may ask permission to ask that the words of the representative from Kapolei be inserted in the journal as my own.
Sure.
And I'd like to register no vote.
Yes, no vote. Thank you. Yes, Representative Awano.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Same request.
Thank you very much.
Speaker, written comments for the journal.
So ordered. Yes, Representative Fukumoto.
Yes, can I also get written comments, please?
So ordered.
Thank you.
Representative Foley.
Mr. Speaker, if I may have the words of the representative from Kapolei, the representative from Wahiawa, inserted to the journal as if they were my own, as well as the opportunity to insert written documents.
Sure. Any
Speaker.
further? Yes, Representative.
Permission also to insert written comments.
Sure.
And then I have a question on a potential conflict of interest.
State your potential.
Mr. Speaker, I am a licensed attorney in the state of Hawaii, and I just need to disclose the possibility of, given the law that we might be passing, that will probably lead to other some legal service opportunities for myself.
No conflict.
Thank you.
No conflict. No. Yes, Representative Jordan.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Please record my no vote if that wasn't clear in my speech earlier. And I don't think I requested written comments, so at this moment, may I ask for written comments, please?
So ordered, Representative.
Thank you very much.
Mr. Speaker.
Yes, Representative.
I'd just like to ask to insert the wise comments of the representative professor from Makiki to be entered into the journal as my own.
So ordered.
I'd also like a ruling on a potential conflict of interest.
Thank you, conflict.
I'm a straight man who will be voting on gay rights.
No conflict. No conflict. All right. All right, man. This is very serious now. Okay, any further, if not, I'm going to call for the question. All those in favor?
Mr. Speaker, Mr. Speaker, Mr. Speaker,
yes.
I'm sorry, I wanted to make sure that
I cast my aye vote. I thought we were going to have a roll call.
You're going to have your aye vote right now, Representative. You have that opportunity for your aye vote. Representative.
Mr. Speaker, can we have a roll call vote?
A roll call vote has been requested. Clerk, can you ask for if we have a required number? I don't understand. All right, members, for the required number, will you please raise your right hand? Clerk, count the vote.
Mr. Speaker, there are the required votes for a roll call.
Okay, thank you very much. Call the roll.
Mr. Aquino?
No.
Ms. Awana?
No.
Ms. Bellotti?
Yes.
Mr. Brower? Ms. Cavanilla?
Excuse.
Mr. Cachola?
Excuse.
Ms. Carroll?
No.
Mr. Choi?
Excuse.
Mr. Kaufman? Mr. Cullen? I'm sorry, Mr. Cullen?
No.
Ms. Evans? Mr. Fale?
No.
Oh, no,
Ms. Fukumoto?
No.
Ms. Hano?
Yes.
Ms. Har?
No.
Mr. Hashem? Ms. Ichiyama? Mr. Ng?
Aye.
Mr. Ito?
No.
Mr. Johansson?
No.
Ms. Jordan?
No.
Mr. Kawakami?
Aye.
Mr. Kobayashi?
Aye.
Mr. Lee?
Aye.
Ms. Lowen?
Aye.
Ms. Luke?
Aye.
Ms. Matsumoto?
No.
Mr. McDermott?
Yes, I'm sorry, no.
Mr. McKelvey? Mr. McKelvey?
McKelvey. What's your vote, McKelvey? Aye? Okay, aye it is.
Mr. Mizuno? Ms. Morikawa?
Aye.
Mr. Nakashima? Mr. Nishimoto?
Aye.
Mr. Ono?
Aye.
Mr. Onishi? Mr. Oshiro? Mr. Rhodes? Mr. Saiki? Mr. Say? Mr. Takai? Mr. Takayama? Mr. Takumi? Ms. Thielen?
Aye.
Mr. Tokioka?
No.
Mr. Tsuji?
No.
Mr. Ward? Mr. Woodson? Ms. Woolley?
Aye.
Mr. Yamane?
No.
Mr. Yamashita? Mr. Speaker?
Aye.
Mr. Speaker, we tally 30 ayes, 18 noes, and 3 excused.
Thank you very much. The motion has passed. All right, members, is there any announcements before I call for the adjournment? If there's none, then Representative Saiki.
Mr. Speaker, I move this House stand adjourned until 10 a.m. tomorrow.
Thank you very much, and Representative Fukumoto.
Mr. Speaker, I second.